So it's the third week of June, and we're out at Winterthur today, and going to be looking at some hives. But first, as the beekeeper on the Keepers Hive, I really want to thank all the beekeepers who have helped us reach our Indiegogo crowdfunding goal within 48 hours. And after the first week, we have over 150 pre-orders of our hives, and that really means a lot to me, because I know you guys are beekeepers, and I know that new hive designs are met with a lot of skepticism. And I really thank you for putting your trust in me that this hive does what we say it's going to do. So again, thank you for donating money to our campaign and or pre-ordering a hive. Nat, Dave, and I have decided that anyone who has or will pre-order a hive during our campaign is going to get lifetime 10% off any Keepers Hive product that they buy in the future, which, trust me, is going to be huge. We have a lot of cool things in the pipeline. The one queen and the two queen keeper are just the beginning, so now is an awesome time to cash in on that 10% lifetime discount. We're going to get back into the bees now. It's the third week in June. The nectar flow is coming to an end. We're going to be harvesting our honey this week and next week, and we're going to have to make sure that the bees have enough nutrition over the next 2 months to survive, to thrive, to continue to make bees. You have to be mindful about how much honey you harvest, trying to always leave about 30 pounds of honey on the hive. And the other thing you need to be mindful of is, do they have enough protein in the hive? Do they have enough pollen in the hive to continue to make bees? Because sometimes people think, or they go into their hives this time of year and they say the queen has shut down just because they don't see any eggs or young brood. And that's true, but it could also be a sign that the colony doesn't have enough protein, and the worker bees are actually cannibalizing eggs and larvae as their protein source. As I've said, Dave, with informative hive inspections, you're always looking at four things: bees, brood, food, and disease. And July and August is a critical time to look at food. So I'm going to show you today, Dave, on how the Keepers Hive makes that assessment of the nutritional stores in the hive so simple, and things that you can do if you start to see the resources in that hive going down. So welcome back. Nat and I are going to take a look at what's going on inside of this one queen keeper. Again, it's the third week in June. We're going to be harvesting honey coming up this week, but we also have to be mindful of what's left in the hive, and do they need? Are we leaving enough for the bees, and do they need any supplemental nutrition as the dearth comes on? So we have our one queen keeper here. Just as a review for people, we have the brood box, 8-frame deep brood box. We have the spacer box, which is a medium nuke box with 5 frames, medium frames in it. And then this time of year, we've moved our exchange box all the way to the top of the hive. So the exchange box is used in the demery. We haven't demeried this hive in a couple weeks now. So this is basically 5 frames that are basically filled with honey at this point. And then this is a honey super, and this is a honey super. So later on this week, we'll be harvesting honey in this box and honey in this box, and dropping the exchange box down. And then later in the fall, we'll be harvesting this box, and then the exchange box will go on top of the brood box for the winter. So anyway, just as a review of what's on here, there are different ways you can configure this depending on your own preference. But generally, right now, we have the exchange box at the top, supers in between the exchange box and the spacer box, and then the brood chamber down below. Most people think you should always leave about 30 pounds of honey on the hive post-harvest as a carbohydrate resource for the bees. So in the one queen keeper, when this exchange box is full of honey, that's about 30 pounds. So I never really harvest from the exchange box. The exchange box is for them. So that assures me that they have 30 pounds of honey on the hive at all times. Um, the other question we have to ask is, do they have enough pollen in the hive to make brood and to have a protein source? So the way to do that is pollen is always stored inner amongst down in the brood chamber. You know, honey's above the nest, but pollen is always in the brood nest. So with the keeper's hive, remember there's 8 frames in the brood chamber. So what we're easily going to do is we're going to come and look at frame 1 and frame 2 in the brood chamber. And we should see some pollen and nectar and honey stores on frame 1 and 2. If we go into the brood chamber and we're not seeing any nectar or any honey or any pollen on these 2 frames, we've got to ask ourselves, does this hive need supplemental nutrition heading into the dearth? Because there's not going to be much out for them to forage. So let's take a look. So like I said, we're gonna look at frame 1 and 2 in the brood chamber. So this is frame 2. So let's take a look, Dave, at what's on this frame. So frame 2 is basically loaded with pollen and a little bit of brood. So you can see a little bit of brood down in the left-hand corner of this. You can see a ton of pollen. You can see a little capped honey at the corners. A little capped honey on the corners, but mainly pollen. So you can see all the beautiful pollen that's on this frame. So they clearly have enough.
Plenty of stores to get them through this dearth.
So again, you're going to see you're going to see a nice brood frame. You're going to see plenty of pollen again. Plenty of pollen in this hive. What you're not seeing is a whole lot of honey on this, because I think most of that is in this hive is stored up in here, in the spacer box and also in the supers. But you can see that they have plenty of pollen. So their pollen is vital for their protein and their fat and their vitamins and minerals. Honey is basically just carbohydrates, but everything else is in pollen. So to see this amount of pollen on the outside of the nest is terrific, Dave. So let's keep going here while you got a moment today, Dave?
Sure.
So let's keep going. We're just going to run the rest of the brood chamber. So again, you can see the typical sort of a brood nest where you have your brood in the center, and then you have your pollen surrounding your brood nest, and then you have honey or nectar above that. Again, you're not seeing a whole lot of nectar and nectar and honey on these frames right now, because we're running a single brood chamber, and most of the honey is going to be up above it in the spacer box and in the boxes above it. That's important to remember, especially when you go to harvest a single brood chamber hive. If you're running a single brood chamber with a queen excluder above it, you can't pull all the honey off that hive. Well, you can pull all that honey off the hive, but you're going to dramatically stress your bees, because you're not going to find a lot of nectar and honey down in the single brood chamber. So this is a nice looking frame 2. Let's keep going. Let's see what's in the rest of this. So now we're on frame 4 in the brood chamber. So frame 4 is where you're basically seeing open brood on this frame. So you see eggs and larvae. And again, they have not shut down yet because they have adequate nutrition in the hive. They are probably slowing down. They clearly don't need to make as many bees as they do prior to the nectar flow. But they still have lots of good-looking larvae and on this frame. So that's frame 4. So let's look at frame 5. So Dave, I'm doing this all without a hive tool, just to point it out. So frame 5 is the queen on it. So you can see the queen wandering on the middle of that frame. And you want to always be looking at the bees too, Dave. You know, take a look at these bees. These bees are nice and calm. I don't see any obvious signs of lethargic bees or deformed bees or abnormal wings. They just look great in here, right? And you can see plenty of open brood. Just a little bit of honey at the very corners, but lots of nice pollen on this frame. So that's 5. So we're going to get 6 now. 6 looks a lot like 5, Dave. Just beautiful, right? Just a nice solid brood frame with lots of young looking eggs on it. You also see a nice amount of royal jelly in each cell, which is also a good sign that they have enough nutrition. If the amount of royal jelly starts to get small or a little bit, that's a good sign that they don't have enough pollen in their hive to make the royal jelly. The nurse bees make the royal jelly using the glands in their head to secrete it. And this hive looks, the amount of royal jelly looks great. And again, you can nice and healthy. So that is 6. A little bit of smoke net. Excellent. So this is 7. So just another complete brood frame on 7. Basically brood, lots of brood. So that's 7. There's only 7 here, and we're just going to grab 8.
And once again, you notice he's all the way in frame 8 and hasn't had used the hive tool one time.
I didn't want to brag, Nat, but yes.
I'll brag.
Here's frame 8. And as you'd expect, the outside frame of the nest has more pollen on it than the inside frame. So this frame is pretty much that side's loaded with pollen, and this side's loaded with pollen. So as you saw today, we were able to run all 8 frames in the brood chamber to sort of get a sense of what nutrition's in the hive. We saw plenty of pollen on the outside of the brood nest. So frames 1 and 2 and frame 8 had plenty of pollen. We didn't see much in the way of honey on the single brood chamber. The honey's all above here. So we're clearly going to harvest the mediums, but we're going to leave the deep honey for them. And we don't need to do any supplemental feeding on this hive at this point. The nutritional quantity of the pollen and of the honey is awesome. And we did it while sitting on a chair, not using a hive tool and no lifting. So again, thank you all for supporting us during our crowdfunding. If you haven't if you haven't pre-ordered a 1 queen or a 2 queen keeper yet, don't forget that we're offering a 10% lifetime discount on all Keepers Hive products forever if you pre-order in the next 6 weeks or 5 or 6 weeks of our crowdfunding. So please consider pre-ordering and have happy beekeeping.